My name is Lola. I'm the coordinator for the Harvard and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center site for New England MHTDC. If you'd like, you can introduce yourself in the chat box. And as far as housekeeping information, participant microphones will be muted at entry. And if you want to speak towards the end during the discussion portion, you'll be able to unmute them then. This session is being recorded and it will be emailed out to all participants once it becomes available. If you have questions during the event, please use the chat and you can feel free to message me personally if you have more technical questions. If you have questions after the session, please email newengland@mhtdcnetwork.org. At the end of the month, we send certificates of completion that you can submit to your particular board for continuing education credit. Please contact ifisher@c4innovates.com for more information on that after the event. Oops, sorry. Oops. This is an MHTDC acknowledgement slide. The MHTDC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. That language is strengths-based and hopeful, inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, perspectives, and experiences, healing-centered and trauma-responsive, inviting to individuals participating in their own journeys, person-first and free of labels, non-judgmental and avoiding assumptions, respectful, clear, and understandable, and lastly, consistent with our products and policies. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kelsey for introductions.
Hi, thank you. And yeah, thank you everybody for introducing yourselves in the chat too. Really great to see all of the different folks that we have on the call today. So very excited to introduce Dr. Emily Kline, who for a lot of you know, was a huge contributor to the early years of MapNet. So it's really great to have her back here with us in this capacity for some of the really exciting work that she's been doing over the past couple of years. Dr. Kline is a clinical psychologist and assistant professor of psychiatry at the Boston University School of Medicine. She currently serves as the director of psychological services for the Wellness and Recovery After Psychosis team, the WRAP program, which is the first episode team at Boston Medical, and is also leading a clinic on motivational interviewing for loved ones, also at Boston Medical Center. So very much related to all of the work that she'll be talking about here today. Also very exciting is that Emily published a book recently, The School of Hard Talks, How to Have Real Conversations with Your Almost Grown Kids, as well as an online course, The School of Hard Talks Online. So she's been doing a lot in this area of really teaching these clinical skills to families to really help young adults who are experiencing mental illness and especially psychosis to have better conversations and make good decisions. So thank you so much, Emily, for coming today.
Thank you, Kelsey, for inviting me to share all this work that I've been up to. And I see a lot of familiar names in the participants and in the chats. So thanks everybody for your interest. So I'm going to keep this lively and ask for some participation. And if your bandwidth allows, it's so nice to have a couple faces to look at as I talk. So if you can keep your camera on, even if it's just a handful of people, I really do appreciate it. It makes my job much easier. All right, so can I share my screen? Yes, I can. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, as Kelsey said, I am a psychologist. I am the director of psychological services for our first episode and multi-episode psychosis clinic at Boston Medical Center. And I started realizing way back when I was a trainee that I found motivational interviewing to be honestly the best tool clinically in my own toolkit. You know, I had all of these manualized evidence-based protocols that looked so lovely on paper, and I went into the room like ready to do it, and my patients never wanted to do any of the things I wanted them to do. And I really struggled to get through these evidence-based protocols. And I wondered, you know, what's wrong with me that I can't get them to do it? And then I remembered, you know, we can use motivational interviewing always as the how, We build the relationship and how we get people interested in our interventions, in all of our beautiful evidence-based protocols, in all of our behavioral activation techniques, or all of the great homework we want to assign. And then, you know, those interventions are the what. So we can always fall back on motivational interviewing as how we get to the things that we think are really going to benefit our patients and families. So I'm going to talk about that and about the work I've been doing with families to teach them about the skill set as well. I've had funding from the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health and the National Institute of Mental Health to develop this content in no commercial interest other than shilling my new book. Okay, so for those who've never heard of motivational interviewing, it is a communication style that is widely used by health professionals across a lot of different treatment targets. It's a way to talk to people about change. So we might be trying to talk to people about changing their medication, like starting medication for a psychosis episode, or we might be trying to talk to people about reducing their substance use, getting more exercise, moving or changing their housing, applying for a job, any kind of behavioral change, just a way to kind of talk about making those changes. It was developed initially in the field of alcohol addiction treatment by psychologists Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick in the 1980s. But since then, there's been lots of different studies applying this set of techniques for communication to all these different behavioral targets. And the basic philosophy is that once somebody leaves our office or signs off of our Zoom, we have no ability to control anything they do. So if what really matters as a therapist is not really what I think, but what my client thinks, right? Because as soon as they walk out my door, they're going to do whatever they want. So it's a way that it's a way of recognizing people's autonomy, and even leaning into that vision of their autonomy is a way to talk to them about what they want, what are their values, and help them explore their reasons for and against making these changes. So when I started working, when I was an intern actually at Massachusetts Mental Health Center in 2014, I remember I got a lot of really interesting cases. I was working at an early psychosis program. And this wasn't the only case like this, but I had several of these young people who were indeed having a first episode of psychosis, most likely their first episode of psychosis in the context of schizophrenia. And they would come in to see me like once, and then they would disappear. And I remember one case in particular was a real heartbreaker for me because he didn't just disappear. What happened was the young man, who was I think 16 or 17 years old at the time, stopped coming in after I think 2 sessions in our program. And then he didn't come back, but the dad came. So I went out, to see if my patient's in the hallway, and his father was sitting there. And I asked the dad if he wanted to come and chat with me. And he did. And he said, I just can't make him come. Can't get him to take the medication. Can't get him to talk to you. And the dad was really upset. I mean, understandably, they were going through a crisis as a family. And they had put all their hopes sort of in like, okay, once we get our kid connected to the right treatment, to the right providers, they're going to know what to do, and they're going to take over, and they're going to solve this problem, and we can kind of get our son back. And it wasn't working out. And I felt terrible. I felt like I had failed. And of course, the dad felt terrible. He felt like he had failed, like can't even get him to take medication. But of course, if you work in a psychosis clinic, you know that there's so many cases like this. This is not a unique story at all. And I realized that maybe I could, if I had this young man in front of me, I would have used this skill set, motivational interviewing, to talk to him about maybe starting a medication or making other healthy changes. But I didn't have him in front of me. And really what somebody needed to do was motivational interviewing with him to try and get him to come in. right? But the only person with any access to this kid was his parents, because he was like not leaving his room. So, you know, a little germ, a little seed sprouting in my head of an idea. Maybe we could teach this skill set or some version of this skill set to the parents who are at home with these young people all the time, really struggling to get them to make those changes, or even to talk to us, the clinicians. So I started pitching this idea around and got some support from it, and started developing this curriculum to teach an adapted version of motivational interviewing to family caregivers, mostly parents. Usually I don't have to sell it too hard. The parents are like, okay, let's go, you know, teach me everything you know. But if I do, or if I have to articulate the reasons why caregivers might want to learn these skills, it's mostly because they've already tried a lot of other tactics to get the behavior change they're looking for. You know, we have this phrase in our culture, like, I'm just going to put my foot down. And every parent I've met has put their foot down, trying to get their child to, you know, reduce their alcohol or cannabis consumption, to take the medicine as prescribed, and it's not getting them the results that they're looking for. So, you know, given that they're not where they want to be, you know, I offer them this training and people are usually pretty excited about it. And I say, you know, I can't control your child. You can't control your child. But this is a way, this is something that is in your power. The way that you communicate about these topics is something that you can control. And let's just see if it works. Let's see if you get anywhere with this. And these skills of just sort of reflective listening and being curious about someone else's values and motivation are a great way to work on the relationship, even if we are not closing the deal today in terms of getting the behavior change that we're looking for right this minute. Okay, so I always show this video, and apologies to everyone who's already seen it, but I just love it as a way to start thinking about why we have so much trouble communicating with other people, especially people who we love and care about, when they're having a problem and we want them to change. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen so you can watch, we can all watch this video together. I wish I could keep up with the chat. I just can't. So I'm trusting Kelsey to pull out comments and questions for the end. Okay, share screen. Okay, here we go. It's 2 minutes long.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail.
See, you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on?
Right. So I want to take a quick poll in the chat. If people would just type in if they relate to the man in this situation, the woman in this situation, or both. I'm seeing man and both. A couple people saying the woman. Okay. So if you have been the guy in this situation, maybe if you're comfortable sharing it in the chat, you can type in like what you were trying to talk to someone about, like what was the nail in somebody's head that you were trying to pull out. You know, in my clinic, it is so often medication adherence, and the other big one is cannabis use. Those tend to be like the nails. And the other one is often sleep, actually, like people are sleeping in ways that are not so helpful. Okay, so sleep is coming up, how people dress, the communication, okay. Sleep training, a baby, yes, okay. Screen time, yes, right. You're spending all day staring at your social and then you feel crappy, like, did you ever stop to consider there might be a nail in your forehead? Getting out of the house, yes. Meds, exercise, hygiene, yeah. So sometimes the solutions and the problems to us as providers or as family members are just so ridiculously obvious, right? It is so clear what this person needs to do to feel better, and yet they are just not hearing it. And so that is I think it's a really common dynamic. But I also like to think about, you know, if you've ever been in the position of the woman in this dialogue, where somebody was giving you solutions, telling you what to do, and it was just annoying, right? It was annoying, even when they might have been right. And so when I work with parents, I always show this video and ask them, you know, let's take both perspectives. Have you ever been in this position? Have you ever been in the other one? And it can be helpful to take a moment to empathize with the woman in this situation, because it gives us some sense of what our kids or what our clients, how they may be perceiving us when we come in there with all the answers, right? They don't like that. And most of us actually have been there before. Yeah, in the video, Heather, maybe you can just put a link in the chat for anybody who wants to share that with their family members or colleagues. Okay, great. I'm gonna go back to my slides now. Okay, great. So, you know, when we see somebody who we care about, whether that's our client or really strong with our kids or other family members, we want to help them, right? And there's nothing wrong with that instinct, with that impulse. It's because we care. And yet our efforts to help often seem to be causing conflict, initiating like arguments and pushback. And I like to give that a name. So I call that the writing reflex. This is a concept from motivational interviewing. I didn't come up with it. And it's the idea that our impulse to help other people often takes the form of fixing their problem, giving them advice, or like kind of doing a lecture about, you know, how they should be seeing something or approaching something, or minimizing their issue. And this happens more in the case of people who are highly anxious. You say, oh, I am having this big problem at school or with my friend, whatever. And the person who you're talking to says, oh, why are you so worried about that? You know, it's just not a big deal. So you should relax. But a lot of us also try and help other people by trying to fix their problems or giving them advice. And I would even say that the bigger your heart and the more you love someone, the more liable you are probably to be doing this. And the problem is that it can actually drive people away from making the changes they need. As you could see in that video, she just wasn't listening. And I got the sense that she might not even be willing to have another conversation with this person again because he was annoying her so much. So I want to give you an example of like how else this might sound. And so I'm going to kind of, when I'm talking about this, I'm going to talk about the actual content of motivational interviewing and the way I teach it. And I'm also going to tell you about the research studies that I've been doing over the past 4 years, where I've enrolled about 130 families into a series of studies where we taught them the motivational interview, the adapted motivational interviewing curriculum, and saw, you know, if they were able to learn it and what they thought about it and then what impact it had on them and their families. Part of the data that we collected as part of these studies was something that is called a real play. And I'll show you what's going on in this image. So this woman here is, she was my research assistant on some of these studies. Her name is Simone Sanders. She was also a MapNet coordinator, so you might recognize her name from that. And what you're going to hear is for every family caregiver, mostly parents, who enrolled in one of these studies, we would do a real play and we would record it. And some of those parents actually were so brave and generous that they gave me permission to use their recordings for events like this. So thank you in advance to those parents who you're about to hear. But what we would do is someone on the staff would get on the phone with the parent and hit record and say, I'm having this problem. And we would share a real problem that we were having from our personal lives with this research participant. And we wouldn't give them a whole lot of instruction. We would just say, help me resolve this dilemma. And we would talk for 10 minutes just to get a flavor of how they were approaching this task of talking to someone who was having a problem. And so I picked this clip that I'm about to play you because I think it illustrates how well-meaning we can be and yet still unhelpful because we're kind of stuck in our writing reflex. So you're going to hear Simone talking about a problem, and then you're going to hear one of the family caregivers who was in the study responding. So just give me 1 second to pull that up.
So my situation is that I am hoping to get back into dancing. I want to audition for a local dance company next month, but I have some reservations about it. I've danced my entire life and that itself has been really positive for me, but the social atmosphere that kind of comes along with jumping into unfamiliar dance environments has been both positive and negative for me in the past. And these experiences have made me distance myself from dance, even though I love it and do miss it. So I'd say like I do really like going with friends, which that has been positive in the past, finding someone to go with me. But I would like to not have to necessarily rely on another person to go. But it seems like that is kind of something that's gonna ultimately make me end up going. But that's where I'm at.
All right. Well, I think it's great that you're gonna start doing dance again. That's really wonderful because you're so good at it. And I would just recommend you're always gonna come upon people that are different. Sometimes if you just burst on through, the first day, and even if you're scared, just keep going. Think of the way it makes you feel when you're dancing. And that would be, and hopefully as you're plowing through, it will take away any insecurities, by facing it straight on.
Yeah, I think that I think it's just a matter of, I don't know, I just don't have the motivation. Like, I'm motivated to go, but one, there's a pandemic, so I can't do anything right now, it seems like. But two, I feel so strongly about all of this stuff that I've encountered before that I just don't even know how I could even get to the point where I can go.
Okay. So, go ahead and type any impressions of, what you were hearing into the chat. So, what I hear when I hear this is Simone kind of spends those, just that 2 minutes of the conversation, slowly backing away from the goal that she initially set out for herself, right? She says, I really want to dance. And then she starts going, maybe I don't, maybe I can't. In spite of talking to this incredibly enthusiastic and supportive person, right? But yeah, Jenny, do you mind if I just call on you? Because Jenny and I work together and I see that you're, what do you mean by jumping the gun? Like, what were you hearing there?
Well, I think towards the end, especially, she was more like, I don't even know, how to get there, what to do, where she was like, just kind of like, I think the caregiver, what was her name? Simone was kind of further along where she was currently at by kind of just saying like, push through and things will happen, but push through, where that's kind of further along the line. Like the first step is getting there, or kind of agreeing there. So it felt like it was a little, she wasn't on the same wavelength a little bit.
Yeah, they're on different pages. Simone's talking about, oh, I don't know. She's talking about all these conflicts that she's perceiving. The other person is like, do it. And I like this cheerleading word that someone put into the chat here. I agree. She's being a cheerleader, which sometimes is just what we need. But if it's just like not the right moment, it's going to fall flat. And I like this suggestion that if the caregiver had asked some questions, it might have really been helpful. So just keep that in mind. As we go through. All right. So, here's the basic philosophy, and I think this is what Jenny was getting at, is that, we all have a tendency to get defensive when people tell us that we need to change what we're doing. Even, really interestingly, if we're the ones who go to someone for advice, we still get mad when somebody says we need to change. I'm sure there's some really amazing souls out there who don't, and who are just like the most sort of egoless, action-oriented people in the world. But like most of us are kind of like prickly and defensive around the idea of change. And I think it's because we're all working hard and doing our best. And there's a reason why we're doing things the way we're doing them. So we never want to kind of be talking to someone about behavior change in a way that elicits that defensive, upset reaction, right? We want to be talking to the part of the person that is curious about change, is hopeful about change, is interested in change, because we all have both sides of us. So the idea is that in order to talk to the optimistic, curious side of someone, they need to be feeling understood, like we really are interested in them, their values, their history, their perspective, their culture, their goals. We need to be asking them to do things that they feel confident they can do. If somebody asks me like to start an exercise plan of running 10 miles a day, I'm not going to do that, right? And it's because I'm not confident that I could even run, I'm not even going to say a number, any number of miles right now, right? So if you gave me a plan that involved like a super intense running schedule, I'm not going to do it, not because I don't want to exercise, but because you're undermining my confidence by asking me to do things I don't think I can do. And the other thing we all need to feel in order to not get defensive and to be receptive to someone's advice and suggestions is we have to feel like we're in control. And I think this is especially true for teenagers and young adults who are really exploring those autonomy needs and trying to do things for themselves. But I think we all feel this way, and we can all be really self-destructive just when we feel like people are pushing us around, and we just want to prove that we're in charge and not them. So we never want to talk to that part of someone. We want to help people to feel understood, confident, and in control so that they can come up with solutions to their problems or be receptive to our advice and solutions to their problems. So how do we do that? Well, obviously not by kind of cheerleading or jumping in and solving their problems for them right away. I want to offer a little bit, this is kind of a little bit of the curriculum that I do with parents. And I want to offer it to you so you all get a flavor of it and also maybe learn something that's useful to you today in your own practice or in your own family. So the first skill that I teach after we talk about the writing reflex and the need to feel understood, confident, confident, and in control is doing reflections. So this is something that is like simple, but not easy, but it does get easy if you practice it. So reflection is a statement. It is when we repeat back essentially what we just heard someone say, or you kind of paraphrase, summarize, take a stab at what they meant. And the goal is to slow down the conversation and really communicate, hey, I'm listening. I am listening to you. I am interested in your perspective. We're working on both that understood piece and the in control piece here. We want to help somebody feel understood. We want to help them feel in control. And we also want them to think about their own words. We're going to hold up a mirror and say, did you really mean that? I'll give you some examples of why we might want to do that in just a moment. So if you want to do a reflection, you can do a simple reflection where you just repeat back exactly what you heard. You could do a complex reflection where you're kind of summarizing or repeating back like what you think they meant or the underlying value that you're hearing about. A feelings reflection where you can name the emotion that you're hearing. And this can be really, really effective. Like if somebody's really frustrated and they're saying, I don't like this, da, 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 and you can just say, wow, it sounds like you're really frustrated, right? That's a feelings reflection, and it can often help settle everybody down. You can also do a two-sided reflection where you are noting that someone is ambivalent. You know, they want to change and they also don't want to change. And a two-sided reflection helps you highlight and hold up that ambivalence so that you can help them explore it. You could say on the one hand, but on the other hand, this. So I'll give you some examples. The most important part of doing a reflection is that it doesn't evaluate. It's not judgmental. It's neither positive nor negative. It is neutral. We're just repeating back what we're hearing, and we're not saying, I agree with that, I think it's good, or I disagree with that, I think it's bad. You might get to that later in the conversation, but when you want to do a reflection, you just suck the judgment right out and just offer the neutral content. So here's some examples. Say we're talking about cannabis, and somebody says, well, all my friends do it, it's not a big deal, just get off my back, okay? A simple reflection would be, okay, so you feel like it's not a big deal. A complex reflection would be something like, okay, smoking seems normal to you. And a feelings reflection would be, my concerns are annoying you. Here's another set of example. I hate school. What parent doesn't hear this? If you're a parent who doesn't hear this, good for you. God bless. I feel like every kid says this. My kids say this. So somebody says, I hate school. We may be tempted to be like, no, you had such a good day yesterday. Or go the other direction and be like, all right, let's get a meeting with your teacher. Let's get a meeting with the principal. Let's adjust the IEP. Let's switch schools. Let's move to a new district, right? Jump into problem solving mode or go into minimizing the issue. Let's slow down instead and just say, okay, you hate school. Or school has been tough lately. Or you're feeling down. Okay, so here I'm going to ask you all to practice just so that I feel good about moving on. So just humor me here. Okay, so somebody said therapy is dumb. How might you do a reflection for this statement? If you can type it in the chat, that would be awesome. So you don't like therapy. You don't find therapy useful. You feel like you're wasting your time. I hear you're not enjoying it. It's just stupid. You don't see the point. These are perfect reflections. Great. And this one, it sounds like you don't think therapy would help you. People, I like that it sounds like personally, I think it helps remind me to get into reflection mode if I'm struggling, to say like, oh, it sounds like, or I'm hearing that. It's good kind of training wheels to make sure you're going to do your reflection. All right. And so the only thing I would say about some of these reflections, these are all great responses. A reflection has to end in a period. So it is a statement. We're going to get to questions in just a moment because questions are also very, very, very important here. Okay. How about Marijuana is an organic remedy. How might you do a reflection for this statement? So you feel like it's organic and safe. You don't think it's dangerous. It doesn't hurt anyone. It's helpful. It's natural. You see some benefits. You feel like it's healthy. Good. These are good reflections, right? And you might not agree, and that is okay, right? And if you do want to put that daylight in between yourself and the statement, you can use that, I'm hearing that, or it sounds like, you know, put the daylight between yourself and the statement. That is fine. You don't have to agree. You're just not. Yeah, and of course, right. Thank you, Linda, who points out you have to breathe first, because it's hard. It's really hard to do this because we all have an emotional response to people saying things like this. Okay, but these are great. These are fantastic reflections. And of course, you know, you need to be calm when you do it, and you're also not, you're not co-signing, and you're going to get to your own perspective later in the conversation. Okay, so the other tool, or another tool that we talk about in this training is asking good questions. So yes, I see somebody just beat me to the punch. How does marijuana affect you? That is a great question to ask about marijuana. A little bit different than doing a reflection, but also really, really important skill to have in your toolbox here. So, you know, open-ended questions are the goal. These are questions that don't have a right or wrong answer, and they kind of get people talking. So here's an example. I know a lot of us work in or have family members who are experiencing psychosis. So I tried to have a lot of examples that are relevant to that. So if they say, I'm not going to see the doctor again, some question or curious responses would be, well, what happened last time you met with her? Or help me understand where you're coming from. Or what do you see as the pros and cons? And again, you know, I'm not going to lie, this takes incredible presence of mind to react that way, because of course we all get emotional when the people we care about make like bad decisions or self-destructive decisions, or say things that are provocative. And you get the sense they are trying to start an argument. All right, so these are just some ideas of, you know, if you take that deep breath and you ask the question, try and get curious. You know, you're not trying to prove a point, you're just trying to get curious. It's kind of an art to asking open-ended questions. It's kind of challenging at first, but a good clue that you have an open-ended question going is that you have the words what or how, because those are good ways to start an open-ended questions. So here's just some examples of how you might transform in a closed to an open-ended question. So you could ask, what did you do today? Instead of, are you feeling better? Or did you take your medications? Instead of saying that, you could say, what's going on with medications? Instead of saying, are you going to that therapy appointment? You could say, you know, how do you like your therapist? What do you think of her? Yes, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. There's so many good comments. I like this, yeah, diplomatic, international political strategies, maybe similar here. So anyway, instead of saying, are you going to therapy, you could say, do you like what do you think about your therapist? What's going on with therapy? What do you see as the pros and cons? Great. And I do want to put a little caveat to that, that since we are talking about psychosis today, sometimes people who are in psychosis are quite overwhelmed cognitively, and they might not actually be in a great place to be answering open-ended questions. And so I just want to, you know, put that little asterisk there, but you can always try and then simplify your question if you need to into something that is more closed-ended. But that's something that I've learned over the past few years, is that when somebody really is in psychosis, open-ended questions sometimes fall flat. But let's try to practice again with typing into the chat. So same prompts, but this time respond with a question. And yes, I like this suggestion. Tell me more is absolutely all purpose. You can always say, tell me more. So somebody said, therapy is dumb. What's a question, an open-ended question you might like? Oh, I like that one. What don't you like about it? What have you learned in therapy? What is it? What do you mean by dumb? What's been your experience lately? What makes you feel that way? What feels dumb about it? Hi, Liz. Thank you. Yeah, these are great. Okay, let's do the other one too. Marijuana is an organic remedy. What's a question that you could ask in response to this? Yeah, where are you getting your information? What, right, and with something like that, it's all about tone, right? Because, you know, you might sound like a little bit lawyerly if you like ask it in a certain tone, and you might sound more curious and interested if you ask with a different tone. What are you using it to remedy? Good question. What is it helping you with? How do you think it might help? Tell me more about what you mean by that. Yeah, these are good open-ended questions. Okay, so those are just 2 skills. Reflections and open-ended questions, very simple. Simple to describe, hard to do, especially in the moment with your own kid when you're feeling emotional. But I want to just give you a sense of what this looks like in action. And I'm going to do that by playing another real play clip. It's another 2-minute clip. And this time you're going to hear Simone picking up with another parent. But and this time I'm going to skip the little intro where she says, oh, I used to really love dancing, but lately I haven't been able to get into it. So I'll skip that part and we're going to pick up right after that. And in this conversation, it's with a different parent who has gotten this training. And basically what you're not hearing is like Simone does her spiel and then the parent says, oh, okay, like, I'm not sure what to say. And she says, well, maybe you could just tell me more about why you quit. And that actually goes pretty well. So we're going to pick up there. And I want you to listen for the things that we were just talking about, reflections and open-ended questions. Okay, here we go.
It was like, I'm growing up, I don't like my body as much as I used to. It doesn't do what it used to do. And then, you know, like I don't get to dance anymore anyway because of all the issues. So I'm quitting that entire part of my life unwillingly, but for myself and for my own mental health. But then, you know, I couldn't find a way back in.
Yeah, no, this sounds really, really important to you, to both, you know, your physicality, your body, and also, you know, just the emotional experience of being close to people and close to people who are as serious as you are. Mm-hmm. That is what I'm hearing. And structure as well.
Yeah, I'd say you hit all of them. Perfect, spot on.
Yeah, so what do you think that you could do?
I honestly don't know. I've had this conversation before, and I think I really was like very passionate about that dance piece. But now I'm wondering if I can, kind of thinking about those fundamental things that I care about, like structure, seriousness, kindness. I'm wondering if I can find an active group-based thing that allows me to get all of those things met, but maybe it doesn't have to be dance. And I mean, I do love dancing, but I also, I don't know, maybe that chapter kind of is closed for me, and maybe that's why I'm having such an issue getting kind of started back up with it, just because maybe I should just move to kickboxing. it's like a structured thing with the teacher that's going to be kind of encouraging us, and I'm sure that the people around me will be doing the same. So, and I'll be able to form relationships and meet people. Maybe I should look into that. I'm actually looking that up right now.
That's so great. Oh, that's exciting to hear.
Yeah,
that really
thank
is.
you. That was really helpful.
All right. So bonus points to anyone who can put in the chat the beautiful open-ended question that this person used. Did anybody catch it? What could you do? What can you do? Yeah, what else could you do? Yes, and it was such a good question. And I think one that we all forget to ask people who are having a problem, because we get stuck on our own vision of how they should solve their problem, that we don't necessarily think to ask them how they want to go about solving their problem. And of course, in this example, what I love about it is that it goes in a really unexpected direction, right? There's no way that any of us would have come up with the solution that Simone herself came up with and actually got excited about. And I can tell you, I think this was recorded in 2021, I believe. And like, I think yesterday, Simone put a picture of herself at the kickboxing gym on Instagram. So I always love to see those. And she's still working in mental health, but is also doing all kinds of really cool, creative, physical stuff. So maybe all of these conversations really did help her in addition to being important work for our research study. Okay, let me go back to my slides. So yeah, so this parent did such a good job, using these skills. All she did that we heard was just reflect some of the key points and values, saying this sounds so important to you. You care about your, about being physical, you care about being with other people. And it's been really hard for you to get into it. So what could you do? And it's so simple, but it's really interesting because it does go in an interesting direction here. So as I said, those recordings were made in the context of some research studies that I've done. And because I know this is a sophisticated clinical audience, I'm going to tell you about those studies, and we can talk about kind of the methods and the people who were in them. Okay, so, I had this basic set of research questions. Would caregivers want to learn this? And then because, we started doing this work in 2020, can we do it remotely? What are the impacts on the parents or the family caregivers? What are the impacts on the family? I also wanted to know, what are the impacts on the youth or the young adult, like the person who's kind of at the center of concern. I will spoil the answer for that is that we didn't really have a great way of collecting that data. So what I'm going to focus on today is the impact on the caregivers. And I'm thinking hard about how to design a study that is able to look at the impacts on the youth, even if the youth don't necessarily, we don't want to ask too much of them, right? They're already going through a lot, but I think it is important to think about how do we capture that. And the other question, of course, is, how short can we make it essentially? Because all the feedback I got from the family members who I talked to as kind of stakeholders and end users were like, this has to be as short as possible because people have a lot going on. And so how can we make it as short as possible, but also as impactful as possible so that it's not like something that where you kind of read an article and you feel really good and it feels inspiring in the moment. And then 24 hours later, you can't even remember what it was. So how long does this stick with people if they do it? Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm just gonna look at this. Okay, so all together, this is kind of combining a bunch of different studies, which I'm gonna combine. But altogether, as I said, I had 131 family caregivers who went through the whole training. You know, a few people dropped out along the way, but 131 completers. Mostly, oh, I'm sorry, my hands are busy. Mostly women, mostly moms, some grandmas, some sisters, and a good amount of dads. Mostly white identifying and with some racial diversity, but not a ton. Average age of 53 with kids ranging in age from 14 to 30. And again, these were mostly families, though not 100%, mostly families though with pretty serious mental health concerns about their kids. 54% had a child who had experienced psychosis. 60% reported that their loved one had at least one prior psych hospitalization inpatient, and half had concerns about drugs or alcohol in addition to mental health concerns. Okay, so of those families, 70 of them were in a study where I was explicitly interested in working with caregivers of youth and young adults in early stage psychosis. So I define that pretty loosely, like first symptoms appearing within the past 5 years, ages, I think 15 to 30, and it could be any involved family caregiver, as long as that person identified that they were like, you know, really the person who was responsible for that person's care or the person who had the most contact with that person. So it's mostly, as I said, moms with a good amount of dads and also a handful of siblings. So in phase 1, it was just feasibility, looking at, you know, would people want to do this? And in that phase, we meant to recruit 30 participants who would all get the intervention, you know, no control condition. And then this took place from May through December 2020. In phase 2, I wanted to look more at the impact of the intervention compared to a waitlist control. And let me tell you, I had initially planned to do an actual control, but something happened that in my 15 years of working in psych research has never happened, which is a lot of people wanted to be in the study. Usually for those who work in psych research, you know, that the worst part, the hardest part is recruitment. That was not the case here. We had family caregivers just calling and texting Heather about the study all the time. And one particular dynamic that I just want to name is that we had a lot of moms who came in phase 1, and then they sent their male partners, dads, for phase 2. And it felt really, really wrong for me to give these moms who were taking on so much of the care in the work of coordinating care for their kids who they loved, to give them this thing that they felt was so helpful and then tell dad, oh, you get to be in the control group, you know, you don't have to do it. So I switched it to a waitlist control, which has pluses and minuses, but it has some minuses on the sort of scientific side, but obvious pluses in terms of really respecting that these people were coming in, interested in the training and maintaining their trust. So half of the people in phase 2 got the intervention right away, and half of them waited for 6 weeks, which is about the amount of time that most people took to finish the intervention, and then they got it. So in phase 1, we were just looking at feasibility. Would people be eligible? Would they be interested? Would they want to do it? Would they drop out once they really got a taste of what it was? And what we found was that we were hitting the right population, like most people who contacted us were in fact eligible. And of the 29 people who got any sessions, only 2 of them didn't finish all of their sessions. So it was meant to be 4 sessions, and one person, I think, I can't remember exactly what it was. So like, so one person I think dropped out after 1 and one person dropped out after 3, but everybody else got all 4 sessions. So people seemed really into it. Oh, sorry. So no, 2 people dropped out after they had consented, but hadn't gotten any sessions yet. And then only 1 person who did a session didn't finish all 4. And that person dropped out after the death of a family member. So she had obviously a lot going on in her life. Okay, so, we found this high interest from parents, and actually they loved the telehealth option. Most of the family, like some people have started coming back to me in person. I don't know about you all, but I'm getting more in person for individual therapy, but the family members still really like the telehealth. And maybe that's a permanent thing. No one dropped off after 1 session. And most people were willing to stick around and do the assessments with us afterwards. Of the 28 people who did our post-intervention assessments, almost all of them said that they had used the skills they learned. The people who didn't were people whose kids were had moved out and were not speaking to them. And 26 of the 28 said they would definitely recommend it to a friend in similar need. And a lot of them did. They sent their people from their NAMI groups, their spouses, their friends. They said when we asked them what they thought was most helpful about Milo, I think it's an interesting question because we're secretly rooting for the things that are replicable, right? Like if people just like me, that's nice, but I can't clone myself. So most people said the skills. And in fact, a lot more people said the skills than me, which is good, right? They like the skills. I was fine. So that's great. That means other people can do this, right? Not just me. They also said that they wanted more. They felt like it ended too soon. Like they still had a lot to learn. So we did add on a 5th session. And I was able to get some wonderful trainees who were interested in participating in this study and joining me so that I wasn't doing all the intervention myself, and we could share it, see all these families together and divide them amongst ourselves. And like I said, the barriers that people experience to implementing the Milo motivational interviewing for loved one skills, the main one was limited contact with that individual who was experiencing psychosis. Okay, so then I moved on to phase 2 of the study where we randomized people to get the intervention right away versus after 6 weeks. And again, it filled up very quickly. Most people assessed for eligibility did meet our fairly broad criteria. And in the end, we allocated 21 to immediate Milo and 19 to the wait list. The reason those are off is because if we had a couple who wanted to do it together, some people, they didn't want to do it separately, they want to do it together. And so we would randomize them together as a team. And then only 1 person dropped out while on the wait list, and nearly everybody who did end up completing the intervention. So of the 40 people who were randomized, 39 received the intervention, which is great. And almost everybody stuck around for follow-up assessments too. So we got to kind of talk to them and hear their thoughts about what they learned and what they liked and what they would change, not just right as we were meeting with them, but also over time as they had time to think about it and practice using the skills in their daily life. Okay, this is like a stats thing. Basically, the take-home message from this chart is that we found significant effects in the areas of family conflict and expressed emotion after this, between the 2 groups at that 6-week point where half the people had been waiting and half the people had been getting the intervention. And right away, we were able to see the significant difference in family conflict and expressed emotion, and a little bit for stress. We continued to follow up people, not just at the 6-week point, but also for that waitlist group, we talked to them when their intervention was finished. And then we talked to everybody 8 weeks and 12 weeks after they'd finished the intervention. So they didn't have any other contact with me or the other therapist, but the research staff, mostly Heather Thibault, who's on the call today, did follow up with people 8 weeks and 12 weeks following. So we got information from people, you know, once they were really back to living their lives. What we found is that if we combine everybody together, we found significant and large effects on all of our domains of interest over time. And we found that things kind of improved between the pre and post intervention time point. And then in 3 of the 4 domains, stress, self-efficacy, like your confidence in yourself as a caregiver, and expressed emotion, which is kind of like burnout. And also just feeling like so emotionally involved, like you can't separate from this person. Everything they do causes you stress. Those things kind of improved and then remained stable. Interestingly, we saw a different pattern with family conflict where things improved and then continued to improve and continued to improve. It's interesting, right? And nice to see like success building on success for these families. And, you know, because I have the floor, I'm just going to brag to the other researchers about my effect sizes here because they are really, really amazing. You usually don't see effects this large in behavioral health research. Typical effect size for a successful therapy is usually about 0.5. Okay, so I want to talk to you about one other study, and this is, I started to branch out of psychosis world, right? Like this is my home. I love working in psychosis clinic. I've done it most of my career, but other people were interested too. And in fact, the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health said, would you consider working with a more diagnostically diverse population? Because they saw a lot of potential in this, you know, beyond psychosis. So we designed another study and did this one in a group format. So instead of working one-on-one with a parent or one-on-two with like 2 parents, we did a group format with 6 to 10 participants. Instead of having 5 sessions, we had 4 2-hour sessions. You could also do it as 8 1-hour sessions, but it's really the same curriculum, but designed a little bit more for group activities. And the major difference was trans-diagnostic design, which means I don't care what your kid's diagnosis is, come on in. You know, which is really reflects how most of us get our mental health care. You know, we don't walk into a clinic that only treats one diagnosis. We walk into the room and say, I'm having problems with my kid, please help. And some of those kids had, I can give you the layout actually. So we had 62 participants in this trial. It was open label, so everybody got the group. The ages of the youth were 14 to 24. The top behavioral concerns were rule breaking, substance use, and academic difficulties. And when it comes to diagnosis, 80% did say my child has a formal diagnosis, 20% said they weren't sure, their child hadn't received one. And the most common diagnoses in the group were mood disorders, anxiety disorders, ADHD, and a little bit of PTSD and bipolar disorder. But again, these are not psychosis, but pretty serious mental health issues. Nearly half reported that their child had an overnight stay in the hospital. And this wasn't anybody's first rodeo. They had all been in various services before. The demographics of this group were really not so different, but even more focused on moms, stepmoms, foster moms, and grandmas. Oops, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I already went over that. Okay. So with this one, we had a little bit more dropout. I think that's the nature of group stuff. Like it might be, you might have to wait a little bit longer for the group to start, and you always lose some people. And some people just get freaked out as the group, I think, starts, and they're like, I'm not going to talk about this with a bunch of strangers. But most people actually were very into it. And I have to say, I loved leading these groups. I found them incredibly moving. And Zoom has proven to be, like telehealth has proven to be, I think, amazing for group process because people can really join from wherever they are. And I've continued to lead groups after this. So in this, we had 62 who were allocated to the intervention and 49 who actually did it. Our results for this were essentially identical. Here's the same graph, but just for these participants. Really interestingly, identical results, both in terms of the overall effect sizes ranging from like 1 to 1.5 for these caregiver outcomes of interest, and also in terms of seeing these large changes from pre to post that then stayed stable, except for the conflict, which continued to get better and better. We also collected qualitative outcomes actually in both studies. So I wanted to present a couple of those. Here's just some, when we asked people like at their 12-week follow-up, so we hadn't talked to them in 12 weeks, it had been 12 weeks since they completed the group. So we said, what did you notice any big changes? What did you notice? Here's some of the things people said. My kids are willing to listen to me. They don't dismiss what I'm saying. Conversations are not as intense. I have skills that are helping me cope and that helps my kids. I'm holding back on criticizing and instead trying to be curious and ask questions. I'm feeling better about myself as a parent. When we rated these role plays using a structured scale, we found that actually not everybody mastered it, but 75% of people did. And I'll just put as a caveat, there was about 20% of people who we thought were pretty good at these skills without getting any of our training. So like they sort of intuitively were using the reflections and the questions, and but obviously, you know, most people weren't. And then at the end, 75%, at least in their role play, could do it pretty well. Here's some sample items. I don't think people really need to see those, but I can show them. I'm not running out of time. If you're curious, like how we measured those domains of interest, we use structured rating scales for expressed emotion, which I said is kind of like burnout / feeling emotionally over-involved. It would be like agree to disagree with a statement like this: my child does not appreciate me. For stress, it was like, in the last month, how often have you felt like you can't control the important things in your life? For confidence, agree to disagree: I know I'm doing a good job as a parent. And for conflict, agree to disagree with statements like, I think my child likes to talk to me. So, you know, this has been the work I've been doing the past few years. It's been really fun and meaningful. I love doing this work. It's incredible. It feels really, really impactful. And here's some of the conclusions I've drawn. You know, family caregivers are interested in this, and it's very learnable. Especially, you know, I think MI is pretty complicated, but I've just taken what I think are the kind of some of the core pieces that fit in a family context and don't feel too therapy-like. And our family caregivers liked it and were able to do it, at least in our real plays, harder at home, obviously. They felt like they had more confidence in managing these challenging situations. And, you know, but in a more general sense, just leaving the motivational interviewing piece aside for a second, I think, you know, our mental health system is so focused on individuals, right? And it's always like, okay, who is my client? Whose insurance are we billing is like often my key question that I need to get my head around as I'm getting started with a person or a case or a family. Like, who's the person at the center of concern? And so often that person is very ambivalent about getting help or doesn't want to talk to me. And can we be creative in these situations, right? Can we think about, not just how we focus our resources on the individual, but what are some other solutions, right? Like, how do we support the system around that person, a family system or an academic system, or a housing system, that's going to end up indirectly helping that person who might not be ready to come in and receive sort of traditional psychiatric care. And I think we can do a lot, actually, if we can be creative about that. Of course, insurance is the difficulty, because we need to somehow pay for this. Okay, so we have time for chat and questions, but I want to offer people some resources first if they want to learn more about this. First of all, happy to send people the academic papers. I have a list of references at the end here. If people are interested in that, I'm happy to share those. But as Kelsey mentioned, I have a book about this experience that really explains the technique of motivational interviewing for loved ones. Some of the examples in the book are like kids who are really struggling with mental health and substance use. And a lot of the situations are much more kind of everyday, like social media bullying, or what are some of the other ones? Applying for jobs. What should my major be? Like really running the gamut of family situations. So that is out. You can get it on Amazon or wherever. Here's another resource. This one is free. This is an e-course that I developed in collaboration with the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health. If Heather, if you could put it in the chat, and also the Amazon link in the chat, that would be great for the book. So people have those, but this is a free e-course that is interactive. It's cool. It's not just like me sitting here talking at you. We got to like hire actual actors and work with a real designer. And you can get to know these families as they try and talk about difficult topics, and use the reflections and the questions and the other motivational interviewing for loved ones skills. It takes start to finish about like an hour, hour and a half, depending on how fast you do it. And it's in like 7 chunks. And it should be available in Spanish like any day, but I'm not sure what's going on with that. They were re-recording everything. Okay, and then the third resource I want to give people is my Instagram. You can follow me at Learn About Milo. And me and my Boston University students, I have some like independent studies students, we act out the skills, we come up with creative situations. And we also just like make these, nice flashcards, like to kind of jog people's memory. This really came out of a lot of the parents saying, I love this training and I know I'm going to forget this. So just us thinking about like, how can we get a little bit of reminders out there to people who just, might need that little reminder or want that little reminder in their day-to-day life. So that's our Instagram. And then also, as Kelsey mentioned at the beginning, we are piloting this as a clinical service at Boston Medical Center. I think we've had like 14 or 15 parents come through so far. We've been taking referrals just, I think, since January. So we're getting a lot of interest. And if you are in Massachusetts, you can see if it's a good fit for you or a parent who you know or work with by emailing learnaboutmilo@bmc.org. It is insurance-based. Okay, so big thank you to MapNet for inviting me to do this, to the Milo team, all the folks who've worked so hard on these studies. Obviously, I didn't do all this work by myself. My BIDMC mentors, not sure if either of them are on here today, but Keshavan and Shirley. And then my partners at DMH who helped with this content, and the folks at Donahue Institute, Home for Little Wanderers, and all the parent partners, and especially the research participants who made it good, all right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people. And if people have questions, maybe you can put them in the chat, and we have about 10 minutes, so I can respond to those. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. And I have also been trying to keep track of questions as they've come through, but I think largely people are just saying how helpful all of this stuff is, and echoing, I think, just how real a lot of these, problems are and skills are in day-to-day stuff. So thank you. One great question from Elizabeth had asked, can this be used to initiate a conversation? So in other words, if a patient isn't stating the goal, but the caregiver has a goal for the patient, say something like hygiene needs, can you start the conversation?
Okay, great question. And I just was with a parent this morning who asked this question. So so this is both, and I talk about this in the book. There's we can use these skills to respond when somebody comes at us with resistance, or they're initiating a conversation, we're not sure what to say, but we can also use this to initiate our own conversations. And my favorite way to initiate a conversation about a difficult subject like hygiene is a great example, is just to use the words "I noticed" and state something pretty neutral. So I noticed that you haven't showered in a while. And then you just stop talking and see how they respond. And you're going to learn a lot from how that person responds. They might get very defensive, or they might disagree with you and be like, what are you talking about? Or they might be like, oh, I know, I really need to shower. I just can't make myself. Right. So depending on how they respond, you're going to have some ideas about how they're feeling about this behavior. And then you can, either way though, you can use some reflections to just say, okay, so you feel like this isn't a problem for you, or, oh, so you've been trying to get motivated to take a shower, and use those reflections, see what they say, ask your questions, what's been getting in the way, or what would motivate you to take a shower, or since you feel like there's no need to take a shower, how often do you feel is the ideal amount, just so I understand where you're coming from. Obviously we have different standards about this. And then I love that question that the parent asked Simone in the real play, well, what can you do? Or what is your plan? When do you think you might do it? And then offer any advice if you have any, if you feel that they are receptive to it. But I think we shouldn't shy away from starting the conversations, because especially as a therapist, I'm not my client might love me if they come in every week and they talk about their friends and their boyfriend and whatever. But if I know that they have a really problematic substance use habit and I never bring it up, I'm not doing my job. And I know for parents, you just are not going to sleep at night if you're not bringing it up. And I think you should. I think we can have a lot of influence.
Great. Yeah. A lot of questions coming through. So two that I'll kind of wrap into one. First, Bess is asking if there have been any adaptations for different cultural, racial, ethnic groups. And then Linda also asked about, does this work for 4-year-olds? So are there ways that you've adapted this content for different populations?
Okay. So I've thought a lot about different populations, that the cultural ethnic thing is really interesting. And I think there's parents who maybe for cultural reasons feel like this wouldn't be a good fit for them, in which case totally fine. But most of the parents I've worked with have come out on the side of wanting to try it, even if they initially felt that's crazy, people in my culture don't talk that way, essentially because they have nothing to lose. But I would love to talk to anybody who is having, thoughts about oh, if I were to adapt this to a culture group that I'm familiar with, I would change this or that. I would be so open to learning about that and hearing about that. So please get in touch if you have ideas about that. As for 4-year-olds, oh, and then the other piece is adapting it for different populations. really interestingly, I've been getting a lot of questions about family caregivers of people who are dealing with aging. And just yesterday I was at a workshop, teaching a workshop about this, and we were going through, the example of someone who's getting older and has been getting into a lot of car accidents and maybe like needs driver's ed to recertify or driver's ed, or maybe just shouldn't be driving. And how would we use these skills to try and have that difficult conversation? And it's not really my clinical expertise, so I was like kind of nervous about it, but people were into it and they said that they felt good about like the questions and reflections that we came up with in that situation. So that was really interesting. And I might be, Heather and I are working with Rob Walker at DMH to maybe put together like a little learning session specifically about having difficult conversations with about aging and about with that group of family caregivers. So that's really, really interesting. And I'm a restless person. I always need to learn. So I'm happy to learn about new population and think about it. As for 4-year-olds, I have one at home, and no, it doesn't work. I don't think we do any harm by doing reflective listening with young children. And sometimes it does work to kind of like settle down a situation. And I think it kind of works with my 7-year-old actually. Has a lot of autonomy needs. And you can appeal to his sense of autonomy and responsibility using these skills. I think 4 is young, and when my daughter decides that she doesn't like the way her socks feel, frankly, nothing is helpful. Or if you have any ideas for me, please share them. Please help. Other questions?
We got another one that was seconded. What are some ideas about how to get clients to talk when MI isn't really getting you anywhere? So people who are coming to appointments, engaging, but they don't really have anything they want to talk about, nothing they want to work on. They're kind of in that spot.
Mm-hmm. I thank you, Ken, for the suggestion. So I think, I would be curious about why are they coming in to kind of check a box because this is a condition maybe of their probation. Are they very anxious about sharing about themselves and they don't feel comfortable in a sort of unstructured therapy situation? Are they having a lot of negative symptoms and they just don't have a lot of speech or thought in their head? If it's someone who feels kind of anxious or isn't sure what to say in a therapy situation, there's a lot of kind of structured therapy games that I think can be useful. One of my trainees last year showed me this online. It's called the Picker Wheel online, and I love that. I've used it a lot since she taught it to me. Basically, it's like a spinning game, or you can have an actual spinner if, in like from a board game, and maybe it points to like each little triangle of the pie is an emotion, and you talk about a time when you felt that way, or you use like a conversation card deck, like what was your favorite movie when you were in middle school, or if you could learn to cook any food in the world, what would it be? And we start talking that way and, to kind of ease into less structured ways of conversing. That can be helpful. If it's poverty of thought, you may accept that, like, you could use some of those conversation cards. And on the other hand, just accept, like, we become therapists because we love to talk. Not everybody is like us, right? Like, we can accept that other people are wired differently and they don't have to sit there and talk to us for 45 minutes. Not everybody's going to do that, and that's okay too. So I would be really, that conversation ignites my curiosity, and just start thinking about like putting different hypotheses out there about why isn't this person engaging, and then maybe those hypotheses will lead you in one direction or another. Or maybe, our open-ended questions are overwhelming and they need a little more structure, or something.
Yeah. And Jessica clarified in the comments that mom is making them come, and that's kind of the one motivator.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that person probably isn't personally motivated, but you could name it. I mean, if it was me, what I would do is just name it and be like, so I get the sense that you don't really want to be here and talk about the things that your mom wants you to talk about. Like, since you're here, what would be a good use of this hour for you? You know, like, is it, we could talk about how to get your mom off your back. We could, just name it. I would name it and see what they say.
Yeah, no, that's great. And maybe I have time for one or two more questions. One from a little earlier, Mike had asked if in the research that you did, if there were any differences in outcomes based on caregiver gender.
Oh, great question. I don't know, Heather, did we look at that? I can't remember looking at that.
Sorry. No, we did not look at gender differences, but that's definitely something that we can explore in the future.
Yeah, small, uneven subgroups, obviously, but that would be interesting to look at. I would say, it's not a kind thing to say about men, but I'm going to go ahead and say it, because men are usually not showing up for their kids' treatment. I would say that the guys who do come are like the really motivated ones. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they're like getting, they're so engaged and they're so interested, as evidenced by the fact that they show up. I wouldn't be surprised if they're getting like super benefit.
Well, and that's probably true of everyone in the study, right? The people who
Right.
show up are the ones, really engaged and interested.
That's
Yeah.
right. Not everybody has the bandwidth to do research. That's for sure. If people have other questions, feel free to email that learnaboutmilo@bmc.org is probably the best contact. If you're interested in like learning, taking a look at the curriculum, seeing some resources, I'm seeing some of those questions, definitely get in touch, and we can, happy to share stuff or do a little walkthrough with you all about, what resources might be useful.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Emily, echoing everything in the chat. Also, thank you, Heather, for all of the really helpful links you've been putting in the chat. It's been really great. Really great to have you both here, and hope that more people get in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.